summer blowout?
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. And when we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 10, as we enter double digits, we're discovering who's worth melting for as we find the good stories in Frozen. All right, Simon, welcome to episode 10. We have arrived.
We did it.
We've stuck around long enough. I know for a while you and I have been joking that the average lifespan of a podcast is 3 episodes because you kind of realize what it actually takes to put a podcast together. So the joke for a while was we were below average and then we were average.
And we are now above average.
We are now feeling pretty good to be at least above average. But we will say, hey, thanks for continuing to listen in. We know we have a few faithful of you out there who have journeyed on this with us as we've unpacked 10 good stories so far. And I know for me, it has just been a blast to kind of use my imagination and think about where God's at work and what God is doing in movies and in pop culture. And it has been a blast so far.
And it's been really cool to hear some of the stories of how this is being received and the conversations that are being had around these movies and families that are talking about this. So that's what makes it worth it for us, is to be able to hear how some of these things can translate into real life and cause us to look at the movies and the things that we're watching a little differently and have some of those conversations with our families and friends.
Yeah, like we feared in episode 1, as we threw this out there, like this could just be a really great echo chamber for you and me.
Right.
And so, I kind of go, if we're doing that, what's the point, right? So it's fun to hear that there are some actual real conversations happening outside of that. And I have been so excited to hear that people have requests of content they would
we've
love
hit a couple
for us
of them
to talk
so
about.
far. Yep.
And so we're hoping to deliver on several of those sooner rather than later. And this has just been super fun. And so as we jump into double digits, we figured this was a great time to pull another big movie in the cultural sphere off the shelves and jump back, I guess, to what has been a staple at sometimes for us, another Disney animated movie. And we're going to go ahead and talk about Frozen.
And so a refresher for what the story of Frozen is that this is all centered around 2 princesses who are sisters, Anna and Elsa, in the idyllic city of Arendelle. And while they are very close as children, Anna and Elsa have found themselves isolated from each other and the world around them because of a mighty secret. Elsa was born with the power to create ice and snow. And while it's a beautiful ability, there are also extremely dangerous parts of this, and haunted by a moment where she nearly killed her younger sister, Anna. Elsa has isolated herself, spending every waking minute trying to suppress her growing powers. And she lives in fear and wrestles with the effects of this magic and accidentally sets off an eternal winter that she can't stop. And so Anna, her sister, seeks to end this isolation and reunite with her sister and sets off to help Elsa end this eternal winter in a story that teaches us that only love can drive out fear and thaw what is frozen.
And this movie is a box office powerhouse. This movie brought in $401 million domestically when it came out and $1.4 billion globally. It is the 16th highest grossing film of all time, and for reference, that means it comes in just below Barbie and Avengers Age of Ultron.
Okay.
And is currently beating out Super Mario Brothers, the new movie that came out here a little while back, and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, the finale of the Harry Potter saga.
It's a big deal.
Got beat by Frozen.
Yeah.
It has been and still is a very popular film.
And one of the things that totally took off with this movie as well is the music, the songs. And in fact, the song Let It Go was a commercial success, not just within the movie, but legit on the radio commercial success, became the first song from a Disney animated musical to reach the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 since 1995 when Colors of the Wind and Pocahontas peaked at number 4 on the chart.
Gold, mountains of it.
Yes, that is amazing.
It's rarefied air for sure.
This movie, to add to its accolades here, also won 2 Academy Awards for, unsurprisingly, Best Original Song and Best Animated Feature. And so this movie is a powerhouse in many ways. I am sure if we had the ability to look at the Disney streaming numbers, I would bet that this is still a very heavily watched film on Disney Plus. My family is not in the era of Frozen yet. Our daughter is too young to really jump into this one. And so this is one that I've seen probably 3 or 4 times just because of its popularity. Like, you can't help but run into Frozen, but it's not one that's like ready, go, it's a Friday night, or it's a random afternoon and it's a Frozen time. That's not something that gets demanded for us. So I don't have a whole ton of exposure to this movie.
This is not one of our regular go-tos either, but just because when you have kids around this age, you're going to, be familiar with some of these characters and the story. It's a good one. And this is really, I think, even from my childhood, it reminds me of the magic that Disney had at that time of Disney princess after Disney princess. They kind of like captured that magic back in this movie of Frozen, and it has all of the markers of some of their most successful things.
That's exactly right. We've got the sidekicks. We've got kind of these random moments. One that was really like specific for me, a memory that tied back to a Disney classic, was the wolves that chase Anna and Kristoff at one point have like the same animation style as the wolves from Beauty and the Beast, and it had an immediate callback in my memory for me.
And at
when
night
Belle,
with
I think,
the
is on
lantern light, like all that stuff.
Yes, it had all those kind of. It was like the eyes in the woods first, and then like creep into the light, kind of stalking around them. And I was just like, oh man, Disney still got it. They know their source material. They know how to cook. Like, this was super fun. So as we start diving into Frozen, we want to talk about just a little bit of movie magic. Some elements in this movie that really just kind of either capture our attention or just super fun, notable either cinematography or animation or choices that they've made that we just love geeking out over.
And one of the things that jumps out first for me is sort of the details and music that puts it in this very rich setting, like this Nordic, Norwegian setting. From the outset, this very choral, layered music and the Nordic architecture, all of that stuff really lends itself well to create a rich world, a rich texture to this setting that the story is in. And I think it carries throughout the movie.
And I think they could tell that that was a successful choice because we see that, again, almost identically in how the movie Moana begins. We get another just musical start and fade in with a soundtrack that kind of establishes the context we're entering into.
And they don't really rely on that for the other music within the movie. They don't take that much further, but it absolutely helps place the viewer in the setting right from the start, and it brings this huge texture to it.
A little bit of movie magic for me is just, man, the animators were working overtime in this movie. It felt like
ice and snow, all these effects.
My goodness. Any swish and swirl just looked so sharp. Anytime Elsa displayed her powers, just captures that imagination. I'm like, you are a superhero. Like, this is so cool. And so even just making snow look either like soft and smooth, like I just want to lay in a cloud, or sharp and scary. There are great contrasts in what they're creating here in the animation, and enough that there is emotion hidden in the motion of what they're creating in snow and blizzards or when it clears or something like that. And my favorite example of like the animator's choices here was when Elsa's running, she gets exposed and she's running across the lake to get away. And with every step, you get these ice snowflakes that just burst out and erupt and start to flow across this lake. Everything else is dark. It's super stark contrast, and it looks amazing. I remember when they started advertising for Frozen, that was a shot they used, was her running away, and that caught my imagination and attention then. And every time I watch this movie now, I just go, that's cool. Every single time.
And I love the detail of how they involve ice in the symbolism, even from the very beginning with the cutting of the ice and the colors within all the colors that they add into the ice. It'd be really easy just to let that be blue and but they get so many hues in there that shows different symbolism. And in the castle, the frozen castle, when her fear is taking over, the colors change within it. There's a darkness, a broodingness to that. And
that's such a good catch. I hadn't even thought of that. That is so cool.
I think one of my favorite things about this movie is just from a movie magic standpoint, or like the landscapes, when they kind of cut out and you see the landscape around Arendelle and stuff like that. It's all of the things that classic Disney movies have done to create this just rich storybook fairy tale texture. It's one of those things every time they pull away, it's like, oh man, that's just gorgeous. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, that is such a good thought. It makes me think of two in particular, whether it's The Little Mermaid, where it has these establishing shots and transitionary shots of life under the sea, or in Aladdin, where you literally get a magic carpet ride over this whole city. Like you get a great excuse to show a lot of the context. Also, in The Lion King, you have Pride Rock and the savannah that stretches for miles. You know, like those immediately jump to mind as you said that. I'm like, oh, that's such a good catch. That is so cool. Some movie magic that I just love personally that I'm going to hate myself if I don't talk about are the Arrested Development references that exist in this movie. And there are two of them that have been confirmed that they exist in this movie. And the first is when the Duke of Weselton is dancing with Anna at the ball. And he's dancing around her and he says,
like a chicken with the face of a monkey.
And what he does as he does that, he kind of puts his hand in front of his forehead and kicks his legs out. I know the
scene that you're talking about,
And the joke that's referencing in Arrested Development is that they're calling Michael, the main character, a chicken. Like 3 members of his family are doing this and they all imitate chickens, and it's obvious that none of them know what a chicken is. So they start doing like a
these aren't even birds,
and making just all these weird references to just some type of bird. And the joke is just,
has anyone in this family ever even seen a chicken?
And so when he jumps around saying like a chicken with the face of a monkey, he does that exact same dance that those family members do every single time.
So what's the tie then? Are these being made at around the same time? Like
they are not at all being made at the same time, but it's the writers and animators having an appreciation and love for Arrested Development and had an opportunity.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting because we talk about a lot of times how certain Disney movies have connections to other Disney movies, but typically it doesn't go outside and make an homage or a reference to a completely unrelated piece of work.
And so the second one is in the song when Hans and Anna are singing together, when they're meeting each other and making all these connections.
Yeah.
And they say, it's crazy, we finish each other's sandwiches. That's what I was going to say. And that's another Arrested Development joke where Michael, the main character, is talking to his sister and says,
it's like we finish each other's sandwiches. Sentences.
He goes, why would I have said sandwiches there? And it just became one of those like iconic Arrested Development quotes. And so that's yet another pull that they even put into a song in this moment that makes sense on its own. But if you know Arrested Development, you would go, I know that reference.
I would love to just keep pulling on that thread to find its source. Like which of these writers is the Arrested Development fan? Like
who had the permission to make this happen? Or who snuck it in? How'd they pull this off?
Who snuck it in and did the like overarching directors or head writers know that that's what you were doing? Oh, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. Another piece of movie magic for me is just the quality and richness of each of the characters. A lot of times in these Disney princess casts, so to speak, there's some weak links. And I think that as a whole, there's the Kristoff and Sven dynamic. You have Olaf, who I actually think kind of low-key makes the movie. And then both Anna and Elsa are rich characters in their own right and great voicings, great casting. So like I think that when you look at that from a whole, that's one of the magic pieces to this is there's a lot of different characters that people can gravitate towards and they're all good ones.
The last piece of movie magic for me is the theme that I noticed of Anna and doors. Anna is always at a door or knocking at a door. It first gets introduced when they're still little kids and they're playing together. And Anna knocks on Elsa's door saying, the stars are awake, so I'm awake. And they've got to play. And then later, accident happens and she's back at the door saying, do you want to build a snowman? And she's waiting at the door, leaning against the door, and ultimately they're not hanging out, but she's still there at the door. Yes. And then they open the gates to the kingdom and the doors are opening and Anna is is so excited because the doors are opening. And then we jump ahead a little bit more, and now Anna's at the door of the ice castle, and she gets nervous to knock because she doesn't know how this is going to go.
Do you think she knows how to knock?
So here we are yet again at another door. And then she's leaning against the door again when she's freezing after the, spoiler alert, Hans' betrayal, and she's alone up against the door, really freezing to death. And here she is once again. And then if I'm really going to nerd out to Anna earlier at the end of the song, Do You Want to Build a Snowman? Anna's in an almost identical position up against the door in what looks like a frozen room, kind of freezing to death in a more metaphorical sense there. And then the very last quote at the end of the movie is with Anna and Elsa, and they say to each other, I like the open gates. And she says, we are never closing them again. And it's really this final, like, hey, all these doors that have existed in Anna's life throughout that she's either been up against, knocking at, trying to get to her sister. Ultimately, we've opened the gates. We're never closing them again. Our relationship is never really going to be apart again. We're open to the world and to each other. And I just go, man, that little
really
imagery theme for her of being at doors, I just thought was so cool.
That is a really good way to tie the importance of that to the character. And there's a couple of them that even while you're talking that I was like, oh yeah, because her song with Hans is Love is an Open Door, right? Yeah, right?
It is.
That's
so
like a
good.
center part of her character. And my favorite interaction with Anna in the door is like when she does like the little kid thing and is like trying to talk into the keyhole, like shaping her lips like the keyhole. Like I think every annoying little sibling has done something like that at one point. It's
Or like squeezing your head at the bottom, like the gap in the door, and trying to like see under or get through that way. Yeah. Okay, so that was a little bit of movie magic, just some things we love geeking out over in the story of Frozen. But we've got an opportunity to talk about what in this movie belongs to Jesus.
I think there's a lot of rich places in this movie of Frozen where we can find those things, good parts of this story that just evoke something deep within us, whether it's an inner longing or some connection to the story, that I think that that's why these things belong to Jesus. And the first one for me when I'm looking at it is this idea that the struggle within Elsa is this sort of like wrestling with her power, her abilities. I think that that's a really close tie to like how someone manages the effects of sin. She has this traumatic experience with Anna when they're playing in the snow as children and causes harm to Anna and puts her life in danger, right? It's a mistake. And how she handles that, how she seeks to deal with that, there's a lot of parallels with how lots of us deal with sin in our lives, because Elsa's ability has potential for both beauty and danger. I think that's a perfect description of the human condition, right? We have immense capacity for beauty. There's wonderful things about the things we can do, and there's also danger in the choices that we make and the effects of the things that we do.
Yeah, as you grow into influence or leadership of the gifts that God has given you, or you grow in your character with Jesus, as much as there is more opportunity to be influence to the kingdom, there's also the risk, if gone unchecked or letting your sinful nature lead the way, like if your influence and leadership grows, you have the ability to do more damage if left to your sinful desires, whether that's in the workplace or whether that's with your family, right? There's like multiple directions that this can go, because you're building up a certain sense of credibility, or you're representing Jesus in some way. I mean, there's an opportunity and a risk, right? Am I going to display Jesus, or am I going to compromise who God has called me to be? Or am I going to compromise the responsibility that's on me to lead? Or am I going to compromise really the witness of who Jesus is in the decisions and choices that I make? And I think those tensions exist and those choices exist all of the time. That is a great description.
Yeah, and I think like when we look at our abilities, like you're exactly right. God gives us the ability to mess up. God, from the very beginning, God gives us the ability to do beautiful things with what we've been given, and a beautiful role in his creation and part of the story that he's writing. And we also have capacity to do immense damage and do dangerous things, right? So I think that that's one of the things that stood out to me there. But after this event happens where Elsa harms Anna, I think that that is a really close tie with how we experience the effects of sin in our life. Because we see Elsa coping with the aftermath of this. Her themes are conceal, don't feel. So I'm going to conceal this. I'm going to not feel this. It's been wiped from Anna's memory. And so she's like, she's got to conceal this. This can't come out. This can't be known. You know, the lyrics of her song are, don't let them in, don't let them see. Be the good girl you have always had to be. Don't let them know. Put on a show, right? All of these things we're trying to conceal. We're trying to hold this in. We're trying to maintain this outer image.
We're white knuckling it, trying to
Yes.
hold it together out of our own willpower, out of our own sense of control. And it's really similar to, unsurprisingly, this was a theme I started to draw out to in a slightly different direction, was I think this is a little bit of how we cope with fear, right? Which I think can be very similar or parallel.
It's absolutely fear. She has this fear of like, oh, if I make one wrong move, then everybody's going to know.
Right. And there's a great irony in this story where the warning that she gets is like, fear is going to be your enemy. Fear is going to be the risk, is what she's told.
Yes.
And then the interpretation by that in her family, dad almost immediately is, we'll lock the gates, we'll reduce the staff, we'll limit her contact with people, right? It's this isolationist, really like, we can't take the risk. And so we're going to pull back and we're going to hold on to what we control here. And the irony being that the very things they're doing to protect Anna, or as we try to protect ourselves and white knuckle our way, are what are creating the fears down the road that she's experiencing. And I had that moment where I was like, oh no, I'm watching this knowing how this plays out and going like, don't do it. Don't do it. Like, oh, your heart just
supposed to feel. Yeah.
Right, your heart just breaks in a different way. You're starting to go, this is not going to be a good call.
And I think there's two ways that Elsa tries to deal with this breakdown, this moment of brokenness. She tries to manage it two different ways in the movie. The first one is through control, like we're talking about. And I think that is a very religious approach to dealing with the consequences of sin. We try to control, we try behavior modification. We try to control our environments. We try to put our gloves on. We're going to lock the doors. We're going to lock the gates. We're going to keep anything out that might risk this. We're going to learn to control
The risk is too great. There's a strong sense of legalism, right? Of like, if I check these boxes or I do these things, everything will stay within the lines and it will be okay. And I'm going to force my way into that.
But there's also another approach that we see her take later in the movie that I think connects with the human experience of sin as well. Like, the other side of it is this let it go attitude. This like, it doesn't matter. I can't control it. I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to be me. When she's up on the mountain, she says, couldn't keep it in. Heaven knows I tried. And when she's talking with Anna in the ice castle, she's saying, I'm going to be who I am without hurting anybody. And even in the song, I think it's the moment when she's doing the ice bridge, the steps up to the where she's going to build the castle. She says, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. The other response is kind of the polar opposite. Is it's like saying, well, it doesn't matter what I do anymore. I've got to let it go. I can't control it. So I'm just going to let it go, and everybody's going to have to be okay with it. I'm going to let the mess, the storm that's inside of me, is how she describes it at times. I'm just going to let this out. And I think that those responses to sin, they feel like opposites, but they're both trying to manage the effects of sin. It's kind of like, at first, I'm going to control this. So I'm going to try to hold this back. I'm going to hold this in. I'm going to try to limit the exposure. I'm going to try to control the effects of this myself with my own will. And then the other one is just like, well, I can't do that. So I'm just going to let it all hang out. You got to be okay with it. You got to deal with it.
That's super thoughtful, because I saw the song Let It Go, and one of my things that I thought belonged to Jesus, I interpreted a very different direction, where I said, hey, I think the song Let It Go has the opportunity to belong to Jesus. And not in complete contrast to what you're talking about here, but I think for me, the truth that Anna's realizing is that the way that I've been living doesn't work for me. This way that I've been trying to do it myself, will it my own way, it really is this moment that I think we all have of jumping into a relationship with Jesus. What I've been doing does not work. I'm going to keep falling flat on my face. I can't white knuckle it. I can't power my way through. And so something needs to change. Something needs to be different. And now you're right. Sometimes our response to that is, I'm just going to go in the completely opposite direction and there's no rules and nothing matters. And that happens. But I think I saw a little bit more the element in this of her kind of breaking out of that idea of legalism, and that perfect girl's gone and she's discovering who she actually is and what her identity is. And at our best, when that's in Jesus, right, it transforms who we are. The Holy Spirit starts working. God starts changing things in our lives. And I just saw that in Elsa throughout the course of that song. Everything changes for her. Her powers get stronger.
Yes. She lets a lot of things go.
That's right. And knowing that in the same way, like we just talked about, her potential to do damage has increased with that as well. She can create a snow monster now. That's neat. Yeah. And she can build an entire castle though as well. And this incredible, beautiful staircase where it's things that she's never tried before. Thought that maybe she wouldn't have the power her to do that. But now when she's let go, she's able to embrace who it is that she's been called to be or become. And I think over the course of the movie, she has to reconcile a little bit of even that statement of letting it go, like you said. But I thought there's potential in that moment to really look and say, wow, this is what could happen to us when we step into a relationship with Jesus. I realize the gifting that I have, the reality that I can't control all of it, and there's going to have to be grace because I'm going to screw this thing up. But I can't worry so much about being perfect because I can't do it. Those are just some mental connections I made in real time. Simon, if you want, we can fight about it. We can just be like, is let it go sinful or is let it go a path to Jesus? You know, how do we want to do this?
I might push back a little bit. I might push back.
This is great. Let's do it.
Okay. Because when she does this, yes, she's talking about letting it go, being free to be who she is, to embrace that. But she's not really. Because when Anna comes up and Elsa realizes, oh, but Arendelle is frozen. Everything's frozen.
Yeah.
We're locked in eternal winter as a result of your letting it go. It's like the pendulum has swung the other way and she realizes, I can't be free this way either. This is not really freedom.
Can I argue that she froze Arendelle before she let it go? Is like it's still a part of her sinful nature before, if we really want to go there?
But the reason that I think it's locked in that, she doesn't have the power to reverse it.
Yeah, she still hasn't figured out that love is the thing that's going to solve this.
Because when she's brought back to Arendelle, she's literally put in chains. And she looks out at the frozen fjord and says, what have I done?
Let's go. Yes, that's so good.
Because all of this letting it go has resulted in this eternal winter. So I think because the reaction to legalism, oftentimes in the Christian life, we either stay safe within that and we are obsessed with that control. Or, like, how many pastors' kids and other people that have grown up in this environment have taken the totally different approach and totally rejected that and have lived into this sort of let it go mentality, thinking like legalism was the problem, so now I'm just going to let it go. The sin doesn't matter. That is another coping mechanism or strategy for dealing with sin, I think, a lot of times that we see people employ, but you're still trapped. Arendelle's still frozen. And you have no power to reverse it. So the effects of sin is still there, even though we've kind of said, I'm just going to let it go.
I'll accept that, man. If I'm going to take this and go like song on its own, right? Yeah. I would say I'm going to weasel Jesus into this. I'm going to find a way, right? But if you're looking at the broader narrative of the story, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're 100% on it, man.
Because like freedom is a really important thing. Freedom is something that Jesus offers. So, and that's what she's seeking when she's talking about, like, that's what she thinks she's found. And here's where I would say the shift comes. Because at the beginning, if we were going to equivocate like her struggle with her powers as being a struggle with sin, like the first approach is that my sin matters. I have to control it. I can't let this out. I have to do something about it. The second approach is like, my sin doesn't really matter. I'm just going to
heck with it. Yeah,
I'm just
enough.
I'm just going to let it go.
I'm exhausted. I can't do this. Yeah.
Yes. But what we discover later, and this is where I think there's another place where we see how this belongs to Jesus through the act of true love, through Anna's sacrifice, we see that no matter her sin, no matter the consequences of her actions, we see that true love and sacrifice can thaw what has been frozen about us, can release us, and through true love and sacrifice can experience real freedom, where she now has mastery over her ability. She now has mastery over sin in a way.
And we hear the line where she says, oh, it's love. And so that takes me back to, I'm sure, the same verse that you're thinking of, which is 1 John 4:18, saying there's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect.
I love that you brought that up. I have that on my list as well, because I think that if you were going to say what is the one verse that is a direct tie to this story, I would put that into like the Frozen branding with the, like Anna and Elsa, and just put that on a screen with the quote of the verse. It could easily be a quote from this movie because that's such a strong tie.
Yeah, it goes back to this whole idea of like loving unconditionally, regardless of your powers, regardless of the consequences of your actions. There's no fear in love. If I can truly trust that my family is going to love me unconditionally, I'm going to experience freedom. If I truly believe that my Heavenly Father is going to love me no matter what, that ironically enough, in God's perfect backwards world, does not mean often that I feel like I can do whatever I want. It means that I can actually trust him, which I think is sometimes the fear. We feel like, oh, God loves me no matter what, so I can do whatever I want. And Paul says, don't be doing that. Like, that's not what that means. We get warnings against that, and that's a risk. But I think when we are present and abiding with Jesus and spending time, we are consistently reminded that I can trust him. He is who he says he is. And because of that foundation, it allows me to live the life that God has called me to live. I'm going to nerd out again and pull in another reference of content I love. And it reminds me of a quote from the movie, well, the book, I should say first, but then the movie Dune. Where the quote that is very famous, one of those famous quotes from Paul Atreides, the main character, is that fear is the mind killer. Fear is the thing that's going to rob you from your power. And you have to overcome fear in order to be a leader, in order to be who you are called to be, or to be a warrior, or whatever it is that you're called to be in that society. That idea that fear is the mind killer. That's what's going to hold you back. So thank you for allowing me to go to my Dune reference there.
We've got Arrested Development. We're going into Dune here. We're going to bring
There's no
all the genres.
rules.
That perfect love casts out fear. I think that that's absolutely something that belongs to Jesus in this story. The other thing that I was looking at is this line that the trolls say, the kind of the pivot of the movie, when the true crux of the conflict happens and Anna's heart has been frozen by her sister and she's slowly turning it into ice. Grandpappy Troll says, only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart. And we see that that's been the danger from the beginning. In the beginning, that opening song with the ice cutters, they say, beware the frozen heart. And in the interaction with Elsa and Anna at the beginning, when they were children, the trolls say, well, it was lucky it was her head. The heart is not so easily changed. Only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart. But the problem is that Anna doesn't understand love at all. And that's one of the things that I think belongs to Jesus in this movie, is as these characters interact with the idea of what love is, what is true love. And I think Anna's character chooses to cope with this isolation and separation through trying to replace true love with romantic love. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Because that was a note that I had where you have not just the consequences of your own sin in your life, but there's a ripple effect to the sin in your life, right?
We're all trying to cope with it in some way or another.
And so as you see Elsa's parents and then Elsa trying to keep them safe by controlling, it causes Elsa to be fearful, but I thought it makes Anna vulnerable and naive. That's her. She's going to this other coping mechanism of romantic love. As a result, like, there is this ripple beyond yourself in the immediate going, it's not just going to impact you, Elsa, because we're protecting you. It's also going to impact your sister.
And I just think it's really a unique part of the movie that they really dive into what this idea of love is, and they define it in a way that I actually think is helpful. This is a place where a Disney movie a Disney princess movie goes beyond the definition that they helped define fairy tale love.
Yes,
and they're going beyond it in this movie. And that's a cool place and something that belongs to Jesus for sure.
Disney beat their critics to the punch in this one. I remember that was a narrative that came out of this movie when it came out of going, hey, the people who have continued this narrative for women saying, hey, the only, path forward for you is finding, the prince who's going to save you from all your stuff. Totally turn that on its head and say, nope, it's the sisters' love together that's going to be the key to this thing. And what you think was going to save you in a traditional Disney story, not at all the right call here.
And to have a character like Kristoff speak to a Disney princess and say, you don't know what love is. And so after Han's betrayal, she actually internalizes that herself. She's like, talking to Olaf in the room with the fire, and she's like, I don't know what love is. And this animated snowman gives us the definition of love, that is, love is putting someone else's needs before your own. And Anna's understanding is what leads her to the ability to sacrifice herself. If she went with the traditional definition of true love, the fairy tale definition of true love, she would have gone over to Kristoff and tried to solve the problem of her frozen heart with a kiss from her true love,
which might have done the trick.
Which might have done the trick
her sister
in a fairy tale, but in a good story, the answer is through sacrifice, putting someone else's needs before your own. And Anna's sacrifice, her act of true love, overcomes the frozen heart overcomes the mark of sin. And Elsa says it. She comes out and says it. She says, you sacrificed yourself for me? And Anna's answer is, I love you. So yes, like those things, sacrifice and love are tied together in this movie and form the definition. This absolutely belongs to Jesus. You can't do this on your own. The love that we're looking for is expressed through sacrifice. And John 15:12-13 says it no better. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. These are the words of Jesus. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends.
Man, taking back to my Lutheran roots, that is my confirmation verse, man.
Well, that's a good one.
Thank you for bringing that back into my realm, man. That's awesome.
So the final thing I see in this movie, in this story that belongs to Jesus, is it's kind of tying all these things together. The progression of leading up to that true love helps us understand we are given the ability to overcome sin. And it's not through control. It's not through letting it go. And it's not through seeking out some other substitute. It's only when we actually, in the Christian life, give over our control in Jesus and say, I can't do this on my own. I can't do it. When we give control, that's the moment where Jesus can set us free and sin no longer has control over you and your future. And instead of letting it go, letting sin go and saying it doesn't matter, it's only actually when you surrender your freedom and say, God, I can't do this on my own. I want to live for you. I want to lay down my will for yours. When we lay down our freedom like that, that's when we discover and have the freedom to be who Jesus made us to be. And instead of pursuing our own needs or pursuing this other substitute like romantic love and our own needs, what really happens is once we lay those down before Jesus, you find that he can meet our deepest desires, our deepest longings. And when we do this, the isolation and the brokenness that sin creates in our life disappears. And for the first time and forever, you won't be alone. The curse will be lifted, your frozen heart will be thawed, and someday we'll watch Jesus open up the doors, open up the gates, and we can live with him forever.
Whew, what a great conversation about some themes that belong to Jesus in Frozen. And as fun as it is to talk about all those things, so what? What can we actually do with this information other than the advice of, hey, don't get engaged to somebody you just met?
Yeah, that's practical. I do think that there are some really practical opportunities within a movie like Frozen to spark spiritual conversations. And I think one of those areas is really the love definition, because when we're looking at how that's presented with Olaf and how that's contrasted with what Anna has been shown through Hans and others through the movie, when we get to this definition that love is about putting someone else's needs before your own, that's an opportunity, I think, to say, hey, does that remind you of anything from the Bible? Does that remind you of something that Jesus said? When Jesus is talking about loving your neighbor as yourself, that really ties to that definition. So we can say, you know, that really reminds me of when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, putting someone else's needs before your own. And whether that's a romantic relationship or just any relationship, I think that that's an opportunity to talk about what true love is.
Yeah, for me, there's no clearer opportunity to have a moment where you have Anna get in the way of a falling sword and say, who stood in the gap, who got in the way for you. Like, I just think about my daughter watching Frozen someday and getting a chance to go like, yes, that remind you of anybody? And making it so simple to even, like, I can even lead it into that and going, hey, I know for me, that reminds me of Jesus. Can you think of why I might think of Jesus in that moment? Right? There's so many different ways I feel like we have opportunities in this for the different ages and stages that our kids are at when they might experience content like this. Whether I'm going to hand feed that to you a little bit more, or someday when they're a little older, being able to talk about how love is being defined. You know, like there's depth and levels to this that can meet a 6-year-old, that can meet an 8-year-old, that can meet a 14 or 16-year-old about how are you viewing yourself and what you're worth and what your priority is, or how you're going to set up the framework for what love really means for you. Because there are plenty of personality types out there where you got kids where it's doing the right thing. You've got kids where it was a romantic relationship defining your worth, whether it's your achievement defining your worth, whether it's your friendships defining your worth. There's just so many different ways, especially when you get a little older, of how do I found love? How do I relate to love? Who loves me? And dang it, if it isn't just going back to Frozen, saying, hey,
Yeah.
what examples do we have here? I think it's just really cool to find that.
And what would it look like even as you're watching this movie? We have remotes that pause, right? Pause and say, you know what?
Especially if you've seen it like
Yeah,
35
yes.
times in your lifetime.
Yes, and we're not interrupting the flow too much, but just to pause and say, "Oh man, Anna really reminds me of Jesus right there. She sacrificed herself for her sister. She's saving her sister because she loves her. That reminds me of Jesus because that's what he did for us." I think another opportunity for a conversation like this is around Elsa and her desire to conceal, to kind of cover up this really scary thing that happened between her and her sister, this thing that she did.
And continues to carry a certain kind of guilt or shame about
Yes.
that years later.
And for me, I think that's a rich opportunity to say, concealing a sin like that, concealing hurt never helps. Jesus can help us with those conversations. Jesus can help us overcome our sin, and we need others to do that too. We need to be able to talk about that. We need to be able to be a safe place within our families to talk about the things that are going on in our lives. And I hope, our kids would be able to look at that and say, okay, if I have this big thing that I feel like I've got to hold in, don't let them in, don't let them see. I want to kind of speak into those moments and say, no, you don't have to hide. You don't have to hide this. We can talk about this together. Because true love does this.
Which drives me back to like, hey, are we believing that for ourselves? Like, if I'm going to model that for my kids, I've got to believe that myself.
Yep.
And I love those reminders that exist even for me as a parent and stuff like this. And I think the last one for me that's related to what you were just talking about is, what are the consequences of fear in your life and what are your reactions to it? Maybe a little different than reactions to sin, but so many times in my life, I know that my fear, either what people are going to think of me, whether something's going to work out or not, I don't know what comes next, and I don't know what's at risk. There's so many things that I think get in the way of who God is truly calling me to be, what
Yes.
obedience really looks
Totally.
like. And we get a great picture from Elsa of saying,
Yes.
hey, here's the impact and consequence of fear ruling your life. You
Yes.
tend to be a little bit more isolated. You tend to be afraid of opportunity. When things happen, there's a lashing out, even unintentionally, from Elsa.
Yes.
And then there's a fleeing, there's a running, and you see the contrast of when that fear starts to break down and place itself in a healthy place, you can grow into these gifts that God has given you and placed in you. And I think it helps us as we grow out of that. It allows us to be healthily confident in our gifts while remaining humble. I think when we are able to learn how to overcome some of those fears, we can lean into where God has placed us and where God wants us to grow so we can be confident in the way that He's wired us and where He's placed us. For example, Simon, I know that you are a strategic thinker. That's just the way that you're wired. And you have a gift for that. And it'd be very easy at different times to either be like, I'm afraid of what somebody's going to think. I'm just kind of barreling all these ideas at them, or critiques or notes. And you could kind of hold that gift back if you have a fear of like what people are going to think of me. And instead going, no, this is something that God has designed me and wired me to do. And so I'm going to lean into that gift, not in the way that's like, oh, look at me, I can piece all these things together, which you can do.
Do you think it would be like apt to say I should let it go?
We clearly said that you should not. But it gives you the ability to embrace how God has wired you and remaining confident in your gifts, identifying your gifts, and then kind of leading out of those naturally in a way that isn't just propping yourself up to feel like you're great and you're the hero, but you just get to grow in what God has given you freely in order to serve His kingdom in some really unique and meaningful ways. All right, Simon, it is time for Love It or Leave It, where we have the opportunity to talk about the things that we loved and some of the things that we could do without. And so, Simon, my first Love It or Leave It for you is Olaf the character, period. Is he a love it or leave it?
I think he has to be a love it. I've kind of already given this away earlier. He's my low-key MVP for this movie.
Yeah.
I think that the humor that he brings is spot on. And one of my favorite things about Olaf that is an absolute love it for me is when he does his songs and he goes into this very operatic voice. It's a love it for me every time. It's so comical. It's so perfect. And it's so like over the top grandiose and stuff. It's so good.
So I'm setting you up here a little bit because
All
it's
right.
time for What Aboutin's hot takes. I think Olaf is a leave it for me.
Oh, no.
Like, I get the role that he's playing, and he does a real good job with
Really?
it. But I have these moments where I'm like, you are rubbing me the wrong way, homie. You can just stay attached to that ice pick you've been impaled on, and you just
Say
chill
more.
there, man.
Say more.
And part of it for me is a little bit of my cultural influence that I come from, where the actor Josh Gad, who voices Olaf, will never not be the character Bear Claw from New Girl. And that will forever rob me from a picture of who Olaf is. So if you haven't seen New Girl,
It prevents him from being endearing to you.
yes. So if you haven't seen New Girl, which a lot of people I think still haven't, Bear Claw is just a horribly socially awkward character who is just quirky in all the wrong ways.
I'd offer you my hand, but it's quite wet.
Still standing close to people.
My building has cable internet now. Did you get even prettier?
He's this almost a cameo character who just shows up maybe once or twice a season, and it's Josh Gad just stumbling around and using some of the same type of like humor and even operatic like voicing and things and singing to like make his character quirky and not endearing in that show in a way that Olaf absolutely is in this.
So it's annoying by association.
I think that
Yeah.
it is. That may be my case, but throughout the movie, I think Olaf has some great zingers in there, but overall, as like a character and his vibe, I just go, no, thanks. I don't need more of that. And a great example for me was I watched the Olaf shorts where he's like retelling Disney
Yeah.
stories, which
Yeah.
I feel like would be right up my alley. Let's like, oh, let's poke fun at the Disney stories. And like halfway through each of them, I was like, I don't want to watch this snowman anymore. Like I'm good.
That's the whole reason those exist. Everybody wanted more Olaf.
I know. This is why it's a hot take. I am absolutely in the minority here.
I'm shocked. This is great. I would not have seen that coming. From what I know of you, there's a whole new level to this thing.
Yeah,
I
hot
love
enough take, I'll just melt them away. It's good enough for me.
it. Okay. And I am intrigued with some of the how you're going to answer some of these other ones, though. Okay. So love it or leave it. The trolls and their role in this movie.
They're unique because they play pivotal roles in the narrative intentionally.
But it
and
didn't
yet
need
seem-
to be trolls.
But
Dude,
I
that's
get
kind of
the
a leave it for
fantasy
me.
element trope, right? Like I get what we're playing with here. I get
It could have
that
been
we've
a
gotta
guy
have
out in
that.
the shack in the woods, like some sort of like it could have
Like-
been some magic man out there. Why did it need to be trolls that roll
we
around?
could have gone back to Big Summer Blowout Man, and he could have given us the message, right? Like,
Sure,
we just
why not?
loop our way back around.
Yeah, let's have Sauna Man tell us the meaning of true love.
So the trolls you're saying are a leave it for you. Are you going to go that far to own it?
In general, yes. I love some of the lines and things that they're given, but I'm overall just generally confused at where trolls fit in this, like, in the world that's been created.
I think
this
the knowledge
Nordic,
we're
like-
lacking, and what I'm inferring a little bit is like trolls. I think are a part of Nordic lore and culture. I think, and forgive me, all you Nordic people out there from listening.
Okay.
Luther College in Decorah. I'm sorry if I'm botching this for you and your people, but
I thought that's like gnomes.
well, that's what I don't know. Is it trolls? Is it gnomes? But they kind of got a vibe for those things, And so
know.
I'm like, I think maybe I know what strings they're pulling on there. So I would say I am indifferent, but their song is a banger, and I'm here for that.
Oh, okay, because that was one of my other love it or leave it's for you.
Yeah,
Was
he's
the-
a little bit
the
of a
set-
fixer-upper. That is
the
clever.
fixer-upper song.
And in particular, when they turn the dime on that and they say, well, she's a bit of a fixer-upper, right? Because she's engaged.
Yeah.
And that
Do
little
you like
hint
the
at the
central
end.
message of the song, like the style of the song? Okay, yep.
Oh,
but
yeah,
like
I
the
love
central
that.
message of the song. Love it or
Because
leave it.
what is the line? It's like, fix this fixer-upper with a little bit of love or something like that.
Yeah, throw a little
And-
love their way.
Yeah,
and you'll
yeah.
Bring
And so
out their best.
I like the line to Anna that says when people are mad or scared or stressed, they do weird things. I think that's a message Anna needs to hear in that moment about why her sister had the outburst, speaking to her soul there. I think that's great. So throw a little love their way and you'll bring out the best. So I think there's a little bit of a message of forgiveness there that Anna needs.
I love it. So as much as I don't love the Trolls, I love that song, especially in the context of trying to break down this fairy tale love relationship and this fairy tale marriage and wedding and stuff, recognizing the flaws in these two characters.
Yes.
And saying fix her upper, throw a little love their way. People are going to do weird things. You're going to have some imperfections here. I think that song in and of itself is a really cool way to sort of debunk some of that. And so I'm a love it for the song. I'm just at least a question mark, if not a leave it for the Trolls themselves. Okay, love it or leave it, the Tarzan theory in connection to this movie.
All right, so here we enter conspiracy corner.
Yeah, so this is Disney connection, Disney universe theory. So the theory is that the parents of Anna and Elsa, when they sail away, that they are Tarzan's parents. That they get marooned. So a redemption for the drowning parents. Their story continues is the idea. Yes, the story continues.
I mean that's kind of sad too. The story doesn't get better. They just get death by jaguar instead. So I mean, how far do we want to extend that story? That's
but the time, the time period of the sailing vessel and the resemblance of the characters to
and
the people
what
in
Tarzan's
the portrait.
living is the boat, right? So I can see that inference. Okay.
So that's the theory, anyways. That Tarzan is Anna and Elsa's.
Ooh, I think I'll call that a love it. I think that's a fun dynamic. So Tarzan is Anna and Elsa's brother, long lost brother, is the theory there. And so when Tarzan goes into the civilized world someday, there's an opportunity to cross paths. I think that's great. I'm all for some conspiracy theories.
This is a further tangent and layer to Tarzan, but the other theory is that Jane is the great grandchild of Belle.
No
Beauty and the
way.
Beast. I think it's because of the tea set that she has.
It's the tea set and the hint, I think, at her yellow dress. I think I've heard this one before. Yeah. As you talk about this, I'm because that is intentional. That animated tea set is the tea set from Beauty and the Beast. Sneaky animators. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a love it for me. I'm going to say I love that. I'm going to barrel this one at you and just say how I feel. I'm going to have you respond to it, and then we're going to roll. Big leave it for me. Do you want to build a snowman?
The song.
Yes, the song. So big leave it for me.
Tell me why, though. I might be able to be convinced here.
That song is actually sad. And how dare they make it cute where kids want to repeat those funny lines, because it is not a happy song. It is mortifying. If you pull that thing apart, which I did in real time, I had to press pause halfway through and go, this is a nightmare, where they're not playing anymore. It is a cry for help from Anna to her sister saying, do you want to build a snowman? All she's saying is, do you still love me? Do you still want to play? She needs help. She needs attention. She needs support. By the end of the song, are they building a snowman? No, they're not building a snowman. They're still alone. She's up against the door all sad. Elsa's up against the door all sad. It doesn't get any better over the course of that song. She's just lamenting what they had in the past. Anna's bored. She's isolated. And the cherry on top is what's in the middle of that song? The parents die. Classic Disney move. Interlude in the song. You're like, oh, we're going to get a break. It's a little bit of a bridge. No, the bridge of death is what it is. The ship sinks. And then we get back to her, whispering at her, do you want to build a snowman? And then, no, they don't. They don't build a snowman. They sit up against the doors, fade to black. You want to build a snowman is the worst.
Okay, bye. I don't know what to say.
That's right.
Because I've never thought about it that way. And I can kind of see how it seems disingenuous. You have this really nice sounding playful song, and it's just wrapped in this cry for help.
That's right. We're just taking a really tough pill in a chocolate coating. It's great.
I have a few more little details that I want to, we've talked about this on the other side, the Zootopia side of the love it or leave it, the Wesselton Weaseltown connection. But actually I had a listener reach out to me saying that there's another level to this. Is that,
what?
Yes, it's inverted. In this one, he's correcting when they say Weaseltown, he's saying it's Wesselton. And in Zootopia, he's saying it's Weaselton. The next level is that this is the same voice for both of these characters. Duke Weaselton is voiced by Alan Tudyk, and so is the Duke of Wesselton.
Oh, wait, it's the same guy
It's the same
voicing
voice.
both?
Yep, I had somebody reach out to me that
That
listened to
is-
the Zootopia episode and say this is the same voice. So I think I know where you land, but is
Yeah,
this a
that's-
love it or leave it for
That's
you?
that's movie magic, man. That
That's
is that is
movie
that
magic.
is chef's kiss. Love it. You bet. My last leave it, Simon, because I'm just hitting heavy hitters here, man.
You're very
leave it.
negative today, Chris.
It's time for the hot takes, man. It took us 10
This is
episodes.
get
but
off
we
my lawn
have
moment with Chris
arrived. Let's go.
Bowden.
So my last leave it here is that we have added to the echelon of pop culture yet another red-headed villain, and I am not here for it. The gingers around the world are continuing to suffer from making another
You're harmed. You're
villain.
harmed
I
by a
am, and I'm
red-headed
taking this
villain.
personally. For all of you out there,
Yes.
you're looking at a semi-balding, bearded redhead. And here we go. I'm going to run it down right now. We got Syndrome in The Incredibles. That's Huff Hang.
Yep.
You got Madame Medusa from The Rescuers. You got Chucky, Pennywise in It. Dexter is a ginger. You got Winifred Sanderson in Hocus Pocus. She's great, but definitely a villain. Poison Ivy in Batman, and Darla
wow.
in Nemo. Also a redhead.
And I think they're one of the stepsisters in Cinderella.
She also a redhead? That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It might level out because there's others represented
Yeah,
there, but
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
own it and say, how dare they? Add to the list, probably one of the worst Disney villains we've had, who absolutely is like, pulls the line, oh, if only anyone loved you. I'm like, that may be one of the worst lines anyone's ever said in a Disney movie.
Yes.
And it belongs to the ginger. Great. Good for me.
What is Disney's diatribe against redheads? Is what you're
Scar?
trying to
You
get.
could argue he's a redhead. He's got a black mane. What's the rest of him look like? Looks pretty red to me.
This is so good. The outrage is so personal.
This is a nightmare, Simon.
This is a nightmare.
Something needs to be done.
Walt Disney, what did a redhead ever do to you?
That's right.
Okay, love it or leave it. The reindeer voice of Kristoff.
Oh, that's a love it. Full send. Love it. Because for me, Sven is the internal dialogue of Kristoff, right? It's it's another character, but it's just his conscience playing out for him. And I love the back and forth of that. It's cute. It's endearing. That doesn't trigger me in any way, Simon. So love
I
it.
do have to admit that the first iteration of that might feel a little bit annoying to me, but I always smirk. I always smirk
Yes.
during the little duet.
That
and
is
the,
my-
and the facial expressions of the
Yes.
reindeer and stuff. It's good. It's a love it for me.
Their duet in the barn is actually my favorite song in the movie, and it's one that I have intentionally memorized so I can sing it as a lullaby to my daughter because I just think it's fun. Like, I think it's great. Even though, like, it probably, as I say it out loud, I'm realizing it does not paint people in a great light, but it is still a cute song, and I do like
It's a
singing
cute
it.
song. Okay, my last love it or leave it.
Yeah.
The Wandering Okins, the name of the little shop out in the middle of nowhere.
You're saying the name of it?
That's what it's called, the Wandering Okins,
Okay.
as an anagram for naked Norwegians. Like if you mix up all the letters,
What?
it's naked Norwegians.
Is that a thing? Man, that makes me wildly uncomfortable, and I love it. Naked Norwegians, I'm in. That's super great. So,
And that's
so
the kind of that's the
Wandering
joke. They're all in
Okins
the sauna.
Post. That's
Hi,
right.
family. Woohoo.
I love that. That is a love it. Well, all good things must come to an end, including this episode.
Thanks again for joining us for episode 10 as we walked through this good story. And our hope for you is that this is ultimately helping you grow the skill of finding Jesus in the stories you're watching and sparking those spiritual conversations with the people you're watching them with.
And we, as always, would love to keep the conversation going with you because there's all sorts of other good stories and awesome nuances and love-its and leave-its to explore. And you can track us down to talk about all of those good things on Instagram at All Good Stories. We would love to keep the conversation going and learning from you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.